Welcome to Mixtapes. I am just here with Bruce from Tohu and Jeremy from Painted Wolf, and we're going to go through a little bit of an introduction on these guys and some questions, and we'll find out some really interesting information, try some wines, and let's take it from there. So I'm James Rayner from North South Wines, Business Development Manager for the Southwest, covering the independents in retail and wholesale. And over there we have Bruce. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Bruce, that'd be great.
Sure thing. Hi there, everybody. My name is Bruce Taylor. I'm Chief Winemaker here for Tohu Wines. So I've been doing this job since July 2008, quite a while now. So I look after all the winemaking and look after the winery and sort of responsible for vineyards as well, although vineyards are not exactly my thing, but luckily I have some good vineyard managers, so kind of concentrate on the wines in the winery.
Cool. Okay, Jeremy?
Well, morning. My name is Jeremy Borg, and I'm the proprietor and winemaker of Painted Wolf Wines in Paarl in South Africa. And I basically do everything apart from anything to do with vineyard, because we outsource our grape. I buy grapes in from other guys, so I'm not a viticulturist, and I rely on the good graces of others.
Fantastic. Okay, great stuff. So let's crack on with a few kind of like simple intro questions that kind of like to get the kind of juices flowing, if you pardon the pun. So how do you describe your home, where you are there, your region, and the different vineyard areas you work with? And I'll flip back to Bruce, if you would.
How would I describe my home? Dry most of the time. I guess we're on the east coast of the South Island of New Zealand, so we're very much cool climate viticulture. You know, we're really down at the bottom of the world, much like Jeremy. I don't know who's furthest to the bottom. Possibly me. Don't know.
You are by a long way. Yeah.
Am I? Okay.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Oh,
by some distance.
Oh, there you go.
I think we're 34 degrees south, basically.
Oh my God, I don't even know what we are.
You're in the 40s, Bruce. I think you're in the 40s.
I'm in the 50s now, so I'll take my 40s. 40s are okay with me. Yeah, sweet.
So the different vineyard areas you work with, Bruce?
So most of probably about 70% of our fruit comes out of the Awatere Valley in Marlborough, which is the sort of southern cooler nights and hotter days than the main Wairau Valley, which is where the bulk of sort of Marlborough fruit comes from. But we also we have a company-owned vineyard over in Nelson, which is sort of about 3 hours drive from the winery, sort of a more temperate climate, sort of rolling clay hills and things like that. So more sort of Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay sort of country, no Sauvignon Blanc over there. We also do a bit of fruit out of Gisborne, which is sort of like a surf town up on the northeast coast of the North Island, so the other island. We do a Chardonnay from out of there, and then I do our sort of fuller-bodied reds. Well, we used to do a Syrah, but it's just a Merlot these days, and it comes from Hawke's Bay, which is, again, the sort of east coast of the North Island. It's just a bit cool down here for us to grow sort of full-bodied reds apart from Pinot Noir, really. So, yeah, so we sort of take in, I guess, vineyards within Marlborough. I source fruit from about, I should know that, maybe a dozen different sort of growers. We have sort of 3 of our own company vineyards, which total about 120 hectares, something like that in Marlborough, and then about the same again in growers, and they're sort of spread all over Marlborough, so all the little sort of sub-regions and all that sort of thing. Yeah, so sort of all over the place from the top of the South Island.
Nice variation. And Jeremy, what about yourself? So describing your home, your region, and those different vineyard areas.
Yeah, so we're based in Paarl, and Paarl is about 50 kilometers east-northeast of Cape Town, and basically the climate here is Mediterranean. We right where we are, we have an average of about 700 mils of rain a year, and most of it actually historically has come during winter time, but with climate change, the rain patterns are changing. And I source grapes from quite a few growers, 5 or 6 growers spread throughout the winelands of the Cape. I think the regions that are exceptional that I don't get from are Constantia and Stellenbosch, but I'm primarily a warm climate producer, and as a result, the focus of our business is on Pinotage, Chenin Blanc, which, although its historic home is in the Loire Valley, has been in South Africa for 350 years, and it's been our vines are well acclimated to dry and warmer conditions, and then I work with a slew of Rhone varietals. But in addition to which, I actually have a little bit of a position down in Stamford, which is about 150 kilometers from here, close to the town of Hermanus, and that's a rather windswept maritime area. One of the really cool things is that all of the different vineyard sites that we have partnered with have quite distinctly different soil, and the exposure of the vineyards is all of each of the vineyards is different. So it gives me a sort of bouquet of space of terroir with which to produce a really intriguing range of wines that are all quite distinct.
Great, fantastic. It's nice to have that variation, isn't it? Really, otherwise you kind of.
Is that a? Can I ask Jeremy a question?
Yes.
You don't mind if I butt in all the time? It's quite interesting. I've never been to South Africa. So Jeremy, is that a sort of a typical approach in South Africa with growers, and so is there a big pool of growers who are supplying fruit to different wine companies and wineries, or how does that work?
Okay, so historically, the system here, especially for premium producers, has been basically estate producers who have a clearly defined piece of land which is registered as an estate, and they produce wines from that. But over the years, it's sort of become looser, and quite a few growers buy fruit from all over the place. But I think it's not so usual to be quite as widespread as I am, especially being small and widespread. Actually, I worked for a winery in California years ago called Roussanne Cellars, and they bought grapes from 40 growers throughout the whole state, and I sort of twigged on that as being quite an interesting model to work with.
Yeah, right. So does all your fruit come to a central point though?
So I don't own my own winery, and for the last 3 years I've been vinifying in 3 different locations, which is a bit bonkers actually. But from next year, I've just signed a lease last week for a space that we're going to put a small winery into, and then I will start bringing all the fruit there. The first year, I'm only going to be able to vinify red wine there because we don't have an adequate cooling. So I'll still outsource the white wine production somewhere where the cooling is suitable. But once I can finance it all, I'll bring the whole lot under one roof. It's actually driving me bonkers working in so many different places, to be honest. and the vineyards are really spread out as well. We're trying to be environmentally. Sorry, Bruce. We're trying to be environment.
Sorry.
We're doing our best to be environmentally friendly, but my carbon footprint from driving my pickup backwards and forwards is rather high.
It's time to get an electric vehicle pickup, isn't it? There, sooner or later.
I don't know how many tons you can tow.
Bruce, actually, feeding on from that question, what Jeremy's saying about the winery and the fact he uses these different places, etc. What about your winery? Could you tell us a little bit more about what you do there?
Yeah, well, our winery, so we purchased this. It was an existing bricks and mortar winery from another company that had run into some difficulties, 10 years ago now, I guess, pretty much 10 years ago, 9 years ago. So this winery was built in 2005, so it was quite sort of state of the art back then. It was quite a well sort of designed and quite spacious winery, I suppose. Lots of room to move and lots of a really good selection of small tanks and stuff as well, which Jeremy would appreciate, I'm sure. So we've got a real, even though we crush a lot of fruit through here, I did about a little over 3,500 tons through here this year. We still had a real big mix of really little small fermenters, so everything down to 600 litres 1,200 litres, 1,400 litres, a lot of 5,000 litre tanks, 500 case sort of tanks, and then a sort of a whole range of small tanks. And then really since we've owned the winery, in those sort of 9 years, we've added on, as like most Marlborough producers, it's our Sauvignon Blanc, which has really grown and boomed in scale and size. And that sort of lends itself to larger stainless steel formats, I suppose. So as we've sort of added on capacity to the winery, and we've sort of tripled the size of it in that 9 years. It's gone from about 900 tonnes to our sort of 3,500 this year. So we've sort of added on bigger and bigger tanks as well. So this will probably horrify Jeremy, but my biggest tank out there is 120,000 litres. Yes, we have good refrigeration, Jeremy.
Indeed, and it certainly helps to have a slightly more temperate climate, because I mean, otherwise, I have some of my friends who have large wineries here with huge tanks. I just can't imagine, especially when the tanks are parked outside. What their electric bills must be like. I mean, they must be staggering.
Yeah, ours are fairly horrendous, really. Especially the Sauvignon Blancs. We're fermenting them at about 10, 11 degrees Celsius.
Do you have solar electricity on your property?
Solar? No, we don't. No, our whole company is going through a bit of a think about that. So we sort of had a few ambitions around that a couple of years ago, and then it all got sort of put to one side while we look at it across all of our businesses. Because I spend a fortune on electricity every month, but compared to some other parts of our business, we run a mussel processing factory and a few other sort of parts, strings to the bow of the Cornwall business, I guess. So I think they're sort of, we're trying to get together a proper corporate approach to it, I suppose. But I think our problem with solar is most of the power is getting sort of generated during summer, which is not necessarily when we really need it.
Yes.
The bulk of our sort of cooling, is obviously that sort of vintage time, sort of mid-March to mid-April. And like to your point about climate change or warming sort of temperatures, it's got earlier and earlier every year. Yes. You know what I mean? Like I recall like 11 years ago, I didn't even start harvesting until the beginning of May. And these days I'm pretty much almost always finished by that first week of April.
Yes.
So everything's sort of pushed forward, and it's pushing into the warmer parts of summer as well, which, to your point, creates.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to believe this. We actually start the last week of January.
Oh my God, a nightmare.
Yeah.
I'm on holiday.
You have to come back last week of January, and actually, I mean, one of the advantages of working with so many different vineyards in different regions that I can then push the harvest right through until April. And my tiny half-ton Bucher press can do all the work without it being too much of a stress. My production is dinky compared to yours, and I mean this year it was just about 32 tons, but it has been about 100 tons in the past. Now I've got a half-ton pneumatic press, so it's kept very busy, that little press.
Yeah. Scale. It doesn't make much difference to the amount of work that has to be done, does it? It's just it's the size of your equipment and all the gear. Yeah.
Let me just ask a quick question from both of you, actually. So what areas of currently where we stand, because you're in two exciting areas of winemaking, with different histories and what have you, but what's the areas at the moment as we stand here in 2022 that are exciting you, and how does that kind of work in with your personal philosophy? So maybe not the business philosophy as such, but your personal philosophy. So if I can ask Jeremy on that one about what's making you kind of get excited in the winemaking sphere at the moment.
That's quite a difficult thing to answer with one succinct answer.
Yeah, sure. No.
But I guess what's really been floating my boat over there's a few things that have been sort of floating my boat over the last year or two. One of which is finding this incredible windswept, rather coolish vineyard that has got just the most lovely Sauvignon Blanc, and the vineyard is farmed it's a tiny little vineyard. It's 3 hectares, but it's farmed by a couple who are it's not organically certified, but they follow all the organic principles, and they also use livestock in their vineyards to do the weeding and clean out all the excess vegetation between the vines. And actually, they're not. I mean, it's not a very tidy vineyard. It would some of my friends would hate that type of vineyard, but I love that. And I love being involved with a vineyard that produces vines that are under South Africa's wine heritage scheme. So really old vineyard. And I think those are the two main things that have been really getting me excited. And actually, I'm wanting to make a much bigger play in the future in the heritage vineyard space, which sort of probably means that there'll be a number of more esoteric and unusual wines coming through, because the old vineyard mix of South Africa is not generally the sort of modern fashionable vines. We've got there's a Palomino and Columbine, some funny things that have sort of dropped off the radar in most other places that are amongst the sort of heritage vineyards.
That sounds great. So what about you, Bruce? What's getting you kind of boat floating, as Jerry put it there?
Finishing vintage is always a good one.
Yeah, that's enough, really, isn't it?
Yeah, see my family again, some daylight. Yeah, I don't know. I think where we're going with our sort of we're sort of beaten around. We've gone around and around organics and some sort of approach to organics for our own vineyards as sort of the lead before our growers sort of follow us along, I suppose. So it's some of those projects that we've been doing on our own vineyards, sort of like what Jeremy's saying with his grower. Really, we haven't certified blocks of it, but we've been sort of playing in that sort of space for years and years and years. And I think we're really starting to see the sort of benefits of that. It's a funny thing in Marlborough. I think as you talk to a lot of commercial winemakers like myself, we're making reasonable volumes of commercial wines, but we would almost all be kind of mostly interested in the organics and that sort of regenerative agriculture space. So I think particularly as Marlborough becomes such a big Sauvignon Blanc factory, really, and we look at some of those. Some of the more conventional sort of practices, and we're starting to think, how long are we going to be able to use herbicide and do some of the more sort of synthetic chemistry that's used on the vineyards? And I think that's got all of us sort of quite interested in the organic side of it, or regenerative farming, or regenerative organics, or whatever that might look like. Yeah. So we're sort of seeing some of those wines and coming off vineyards that we started, farming organically. Sort of back in 2013, so they've sort of got what's that, 7, 8, 9 years on them now, and they're really starting to crop at sort of similar levels to the conventional blocks, which is sort of the wisdom would say that they wouldn't, and delivering the sort of flavour as well, and they're just the balance of them and the soil health. Everyone we're all talking about soil these days, whereas I would have said not that many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, it was all about possibly more to do with the wines and the vines, and whereas now we're sort of starting to look a little bit more holistically. I reckon we're all looking at the soil and more of that sort of environmental impact of what we're doing, and that's pretty interesting. Especially now as I've got sort of young kids starting to grow up, and you've got vineyards all around you where you live and all that sort of stuff, and everyone's starting to sort of think more about the sort of long-term health of where we live, I guess. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean,
there's no doubt about it that the conventional vineyard sprays, the ones that are allowed and actually are probably not harmful at all, if they're applied at the right time to you when you drink the wine. When they're floating about in the air as they do, I think people that have respiratory issues definitely struggle a little bit with those. I mean, from a sort of broad South African perspective, we have a very, very invasive ryegrass that grows. And I mean, it's a pioneer grass, so it grows in anywhere where you till the soil vigorously, and it actually takes so much water out of the soil. And I mean, historically, it's been treated with herbicide, and it actually doesn't respond terribly well. And trying to farm and rid of this particular weed without herbicide is a real challenge. But using livestock actually is something that can work. But managing livestock use in large vineyard blocks is fraught with complication. And notwithstanding the fact that quite a lot of that livestock will probably be pinched and eaten.
Imagining elephants or hippos or something wandering around your vineyards, but I guess that's not the case.
It could well be. You never know. That's the thing. Could well have a vineyard in the future.
I don't know whether are you aware that there's a little bit of a few grapes grown in Thailand?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So I went to a Chenin Blanc conference in France a couple of years ago, and there was a Thai producer that made traditional method champenoise sparkling wine with Chenin, and they showed some pictures of their vineyards, and they were doing stuff in the vineyard with elephants. It was very cool.
Picking from the pergolas up on the elephants, yeah. Picking the top. Great. Okay, so let's just. I'm going to just drop you back a little notch here, both of you, just in terms of the kind of structure of where we're going here. And I just want to ask you both how you got into the business of winemaking. Okay, so I'm going to ask Bruce first. How you got into the business of winemaking?
Oh, it was a girl, of course.
John.
all trouble that I've got into has always come through that means. It was for me actually. I was my very brief history of it would be, I think I was 30 when I went back to university to study winemaking, and that was really sort of after having a career doing sort of not really having a career, I suppose, just sort of being a bit of a bum around New Zealand. And then I had a girlfriend at the time who was very much more career driven than me, and she was getting quite into wine appreciation and tasting and everything, and it really didn't mean too much to me. And then I started to get exposed, I guess, just through her, and maybe getting older as well, getting towards my 30s and not being such a larrikin. And just started tasting wines and sort of thinking, oh, this is pretty interesting. Maybe this is something I could do. And I went off overseas for sort of a year's traveling, backpacking and stuff like that, and then came back to New Zealand. I had a friend who was a winemaker, and I always thought, in a very sort of selfish, completely the wrong way to go about it, really. I thought, she looks like she has a pretty interesting life. maybe that'd be a fun thing to try. So I tried a 1 year of a 3-year degree just to see if if it made any sense or gelled with me at all. And it did. I was surprised to find that, to be honest. I'm the middle son of 3 kids. Both my brothers are, very scientific. They both teach at Auckland University, and they're very heavy microbiologists and chemistry people, which was never me. I'm a Bachelor of Arts graduate with history and philosophy and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, damn it, I found myself studying chemistry and microbiology and all that sort of thing. At 30 though, so it took me a while.
Your arts background is what makes you such a good winemaker.
Exactly that, Jeremy.
Makes you a good thinker too, I reckon, Jeremy. Makes you think about stuff, history.
I can imagine the Christmas table is never a dull moment with you guys. Microbiology and the wineries. So, what about you then, Jeremy? So how I know personally your
So anyway, I also came to wine sort of later, but it was something that I was always interested in. I mean, my as a kid, my parents entertained a lot, and my mother was quite effusive about the type of wines she was pouring her guests, but without having any idea what they really were or what they really meant. But it seemed like fun to me. And anyway, I had a checkered career. I studied economics and I was going to be an accountant, but they chucked me out of the accountancy firm because I found the pub at lunchtime more interesting than the accounting work. And I started working in restaurants and hotels, but always with an interest in beverage. And I tootled off to the United States and continued doing restaurant work. And actually, my initial introduction to the wine trade was after I'd stopped working in a restaurant. Somebody I knew owned a small wholesaling business in San Francisco, and I was employed as a weinschmoes, knocking on doors and actually selling wine that nobody really needed to buy. So I always have great empathy for people who have to go out on the streets. But yeah, anyway, and sort of things and I actually accidentally got a part-time position in a winery as a harvest hand. Some other folks I knew, and I was just actually in a restaurant one evening talking to the guy sitting at the bar, and he said, we need somebody to come and help in the winery, a little short. So I started the next day and working 2 or 3 days a week. And after a couple of weeks, the guys offered me a position, and I quit I was a restaurant manager. I quit the job in the restaurant and started as a manual laborer in the winery instead. And worked there for a few years and went to viticulture school in California, which I never completed. And then, I only really started making wine for myself when I was in my late 40s, mid to late 40s. Yeah. So hang on, is that right? Yeah. No, hang on. Yeah, 15 or 17 years ago. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm 61. So 17 years ago, I started making. So I'm sort of self-taught, but having been tutored by a lot of smart people, and I try and keep them in the cupboard as well, because there's always mistakes being made that need some help.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Quick question on the grapes, Bruce. Sauvignon Blanc. What's your perspective on Sauvignon Blanc? What's your view on it, apart from it being a cash cow for the business, obviously?
It's pretty important to us.
Yeah. What's your view on it as we I guess where we are, we understand how important it is, but where's it going? Where are we going with Sauvignon Blanc for you?
So I guess you've seen that sort of diversity. So, well, I think what you're seeing in the last few years, and what we'll see more and more, is that sort of sub-regional story being told, which is probably a nice segue to the wine that we've sort of sent to Jeremy, because it's sort of a core part of how we try and talk about it. So try and call attention, I guess, to I think, companies like ours, even though, I might crush 3,500 tons, I'm sort of small to medium in Marlborough, really. Right. So there's very hard for us to compete with the really giant, the Pernod Ricards and the Constellations and all those sort of massive companies which are, banging out a generic Marlborough Sauvignon, I suppose, which will be inevitably from all the different sort of sub-regions and the different valleys and, wherever they can sort of get it from, I suppose. So I guess, with some really, after I'd started with us, that we sort of figured that our only way forward for us was to sort of concentrate on the sub-regions where we sourced our fruit from. So for us, particularly the Awatere Valley, and back then particularly sort of doing single vineyard Sauvignons or single vineyard wines, in fact, across the whole portfolio back then. And that sort of changed a bit as we've got a bit too big for some of the single vineyards. But yes, I think that sort of, I can't see the style of Marlborough Sauvignon changing a lot, we all play around with barrel fermentations, and I've got, some puncheons out there, and I've got, got a client here who makes wine and concrete eggs, and there's all this sort of playing around the margins. But really, what Marlborough Sauvignon is all about is that sort of clean, pure, sort of driven fruit, and, lots of freshness and all that sort of stuff, which you really get through.
It's
pretty simple winemaking. Yeah.
It's a banker style. Why change it? It's a global winning style. Doing other things with Sauvignon Blanc for one's personal gratification and to see where the possibilities with the grape is really fun and really interesting. But that's from, in your context. That would be such a little side project.
Totally. Yeah.
And the Sauvignon Blanc that I've made. I've purposely gone out of my way to do everything that is the antithesis of what would be the Marlborough model or the standard South African model, because there's a lot of commercially successful Sauvignon Blanc being produced here as well. But I've fermented with natural yeast. I've fermented with solids in eggs, gone malolactic. Done all those things that are not what your regional style is. Yeah. And the other thing, being a small producer, not being geared up for that type of winemaking. I mean, I'm never going to win the battle of the war to do a facsimile or try a facsimile of what you do so incredibly well. So it has to be something different.
Play to your strengths and that, absolutely.
I think we're just so lucky, most of Marlborough, I don't think we realise quite how, like most people that live in New Zealand, to be honest, probably don't realise quite how lucky we are. Like to have a wine like Sauvignon Blanc, which just sort of, like you said, is the cash cow, and it's sort of, it's all turned over. It's sold, bottled as quickly as possible and sold really quickly, and build back up again. I mean, it's almost unique in the world. I mean, there are obviously other areas like it, and we all talk in Marlborough too about having all our eggs in this one basket, and the risk to us of having 80% of our industry all in one varietal and stuff like that. But I guess that doesn't. It's not going to. It'll never. Everyone's like that. Yeah.
It won't go to fashion.
No.
I mean, we're so small; it's pretty hard to sort of.
And I mean, I think the other thing about what you do. I was just thinking about how the trajectory of Shiraz in Australia and how it actually ended up becoming unfashionable, and that's because the wines became so lolly and so simple, and I don't see that even with guys like Ken Crawford and the really big guys. I mean, when you crack that bottle of wine, you've still got a bottle of wine that somebody who likes wine wants to drink.
Yeah, that's quite hard to find a bad one, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's a challenge. Is actually to get enough distinction between in what one does to actually pull away from the really big commercial brands.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think that's a challenge that we get in some of our overseas markets in the US restaurant. We're really lucky because it's almost like every bar or restaurant in the world almost has to have a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc on the list.
Indeed, absolutely.
Like it's almost guaranteed. But where we run up against, like to your point about trying to differentiate yourself from the others, is how do you become, how do you get people to ask for Coyote Bay rather than just for a Marlborough Sav? Do you know what I mean? Which if you go to a hotel or a bar in Melbourne or in Sydney, it'll be just give us in my best Aussie accent, give us a Marlborough Sav, and it's almost like they've become so sort of reliable and sort of good over the years, really.
Yes.
It's trying to get that sort of brand loyalty, I suppose, when the base standard is pretty high. Yeah. I mean, we're lucky, when I travel around the world and I taste sort of like, aromatic white wines from other parts of the world, you can sort of, we get used to it here in Marlborough, but you go around the world and you taste, most other regions, aromatic white wines, and you kind of think, I can see why Marlborough Sauvignon is so popular. It's just so much. It's just
a huge,
so vibrant. It's
wonderful. Yeah.
So can I just pick up on with you both there on a thing that Bruce just raised about kind of like the export market, really, and obviously kind of for us guys here in the UK, I think it's really important just to kind of like touch on what the UK market means to your businesses and how that might differ from your domestic market. And if I ask Jeremy that first, so kind of like just getting a grip for that differentiation.
Okay, so, well, firstly, the UK market is bigger than my domestic market, and the customer base is significantly more diverse. I mean, in South Africa, I sell almost entirely into hotels, restaurants, and sort of the safari business. And in UK, we have a really broad spectrum of customers. The other thing is so important for me is that the customers that North South Wines have for me are on the whole not conservative, and all these dinky, funny little things like Mourvedre and Roussanne and stuff that I love to make find homes in the UK, and they alarm my curiosity about difference to find a commercial home. And yeah, if I had to rely on the domestic market for that, I would really, really struggle. And actually, to be honest with you, even though the United Kingdom is a mature wine market with every single conceivable wine producer from everywhere competing in it, the customer base is very significant, and it's actually easier for us to do business in UK than it is domestically. Our domestic business is either really brand driven, or at the high end, it's driven by some old-fashioned icon brands or young guns who are doing, super cool wine. But an old guy like me, I just can't compete with those people just on a sort of personality basis. It's just not, it's people looking for the new and the sort of cutting edge. And although I do some interesting grape varieties, I wouldn't say my winemaking was I'm not making wine under floor yeast and doing orange wine and doing pet nats and all that other stuff that seems to be interesting in that little small market. So yeah, UK very important. North South wines very important, and obviously, I have such a long relationship with North South wines that goes back to knowing Kim for years, since she was about 19 or 20 or something. And the other thing is that to do well in any market, you need to have a wholesaler that has commercial power, and North South Wines does. And my wholesalers domestically in South Africa are smaller, and they just don't have the reach that North South have. And so for all these reasons, the United Kingdom is hugely important for us. And during lockdown, when we had such a terrible time here, when we couldn't sell any alcohol domestically at all, it was businesses like North South that actually kept us afloat. So, and I learned from a very interesting New Zealander, but we can get into that a little bit later. The guy called Peter Eastwood.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds like an intriguing story. Let's press pause and carry on with that a bit. Yeah. Bruce, what about yourself then? So how the UK market and then differing to the domestic market?
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree with what Jeremy's saying about that sort of, obviously you guys are a very mature sort of market that does have interest in some of the different things that we do. Like I know today you guys have ordered Albarino from us and something like that. So yeah, I guess for our company, sort of a bit in a curious sort of position in New Zealand, because we were never particularly big in the UK, and we were always very focused on the US for our export. So the US has always sort of taken our volume, I suppose. And in fact, before North South Wines, we were without a UK sort of or a UK importer of any sort of size, apart from a one-man band for many years, really. So yeah, it's quite interesting to hear what Jeremy's saying. It bodes well for our future with you guys. So that sounds pretty promising. Yeah.
It's a great team at North South.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Yeah.
Even James.
I'm not going to say anything.
I don't know how it works for you, Jeremy, but for us in New Zealand, like all of our, like something like 90% of wine in New Zealand is sold through supermarkets. Okay, so there's very few actual wine stores or liquor stores that are basically just selling hard liquor, which you can't sell in supermarkets, whiskies and vodka and all that sort of stuff. And they're selling a bit. So liquor stores are selling sort of hard liquor, a lot of beer, a lot of sort of RTD like stuff for the kids, basically lolly water. But the sort of fine wine stores you can count on a couple of hands in New Zealand now. They've all just the neighbourhood ones have all gone.
That's the same here, and the dealing with grocery chains in South Africa is really complicated. It's something that big companies can do well, but little guys. There's specific time slots for delivery merchandising, those things that you need a team and a big wholesaler to be able to do for you. So yeah.
So it's a quick question. Moving on from there, really, and we touched on it before again when we're talking about kind of your Bruce, you're commenting about organics and what have you. I think for just, I'm sure you may be aware, but I mean, for us as a business, sustainability has become a hugely important thing for us. And it will continue to be that way for now indefinitely, as we see it, really, as part of our kind of certification in B Corp and what have you. And I think it's really interesting to hear what you guys have to say in terms of like what your view is on sustainability, because I kind of get the feel with you, Bruce, with kind of it's clearly a thing that has existed in under different monikers. And it's really interesting to see what you have to say, Bruce, about it, and what you have to say, Jeremy, because you're coming from different kind of like size perspectives here and what you do. So, Jeremy, what's your take on sustainability, and what does it mean to you, and what might you have in terms of a plan for it over the next year or two?
So, as you know, our business from a philosophical perspective is about conservation and about trying to do the right thing. But being small and not having control over numbers of the things that go on makes it much more difficult, not necessarily to have things being done on a sustainable basis, because I would say that all the growers, for instance, that we work with are conducting themselves in a really good way. The problem is actually the certification and the follow up and the paperwork, and so I think that's where we currently sit as a company, where we have an issue in that. I mean, I can't get to all the things that need to be got to, and being able to follow all those threads and get all that stuff in a manner that actually is acceptable to the auditing process is a complication. But there is a national certifying authority in South Africa, and there's a biodiversity and sustainability certification that is organized through our wine authorities. Is actually the one that's been, the system that was set up here has been picked up by New Zealand now. I mean that your sustainability framework was based on the stuff that was put in place here 20 years ago or something like that. So that in itself gives a considerable amount of integrity to the whole of the industry. I mean, I mentioned that I've just signed a lease on a wine cellar, and one of the things that I plan to do with this new wine cellar, where we now have much more control, is actually begin to install all the various protocols and have somebody that can actually do all the paperwork and keep everything in an appropriate file, and do everything that's necessary to make sure that down the road the certification that North South Wines is working with is fulfilled from our side. Great,
fantastic. Is that I mean, the work you do there is very much kind of a fantastic thing, really. Like the kind of the ecological stuff, certainly from is well known by us and well appreciated. So Bruce, what in regards to your, so I understand, personally speaking, I understand a little bit about your business, and obviously kind of I'd be fascinated to hear about what that means now and what it's going to mean in the future, certainly for you guys. Sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, we've really seen it in the last sort of few years. Like Jeremy said, we have a national sort of certifying authority, I suppose, Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand, who have the little stamp on the back of, I think it's something like 90% of bottles coming out of New Zealand, that we all sort of sign up to this program, which is basically focused around minimizing sort of spray use and control or controlling your water. There's an emissions part which is now coming into it as well. So it applies to the vineyards and the winery, but it's sort of become, I think we all sort of take it for granted a little bit, because it has become the baseline, because it's what everyone it's what you have to do, really. It's your social license to sort of conduct business in wineries in New Zealand now, is to be part of sustainable wine growing. So I think everyone's now starting to, or people that are interested in a bit more than just sort of ticking a box, are now starting to move into, there's these different pillars that they're bringing in. So they're sort of focusing on waste and emissions and water use, and you can kind of go for a sustainable plus sort of criteria, I suppose, or certification, if you like. So that's something that we are sort of pursuing as well. I guess as a Maori own company, it sort of almost goes without saying that there is these sort of long-term visions for their business. I'm sure you may or may not be aware that we have sounds almost crazy when I say it, but there's a 500-year sort of plan for the businesses, basically, for where they want to see everything looking like in 500 years' time, and it's broken down into sort of 50 and 20 and 10 and 5 and then down to sort of individual annual plans as well, of course, so we know what we're doing in the next year, not just in 400 years' time. But all that stuff is, well, next week will be good, but yeah. But all that stuff is sort of, all predicated on basically having a business which is going to survive. So it's sort of economically sustainable for your people as well. You know what I mean? Like, one of the industries we look at in New Zealand that our owners have never wanted to get involved in is something like dairying, right? So dairy uses a lot of water, a lot of nitrates, and all the sort of reasonably not particularly nice to the environment they're working in. So if you just applied sort of sustainability to your people and to your business, you could argue that getting into dairying would be a wonderful thing to do, and you'd make lots of money and be part of the New Zealand dairy success story. But for our company, they've kind of gone, look, it's not really, we're not comfortable in that sort of space. So they want to be involved in businesses which are going to be, around for hundreds of years, essentially, and agribusiness as well, I suppose. So it's sort of all, so it almost goes without saying that there has to be a sustainable element to that. So we've really seen it from, and a lot of it for us has been pushed from our owners. So we have like 4,000 sort of family owners, essentially, Jeremy, like shareholders in the company, if you like. They in recent years, I've been going to AGMs for 12 years odd now for the company, and probably only in the last 4 or 5 years we've had people sort of starting to stand up and say, what are you doing about organics? We've heard about this regenerative agriculture. What are we doing about that? What are we doing about putting, tantalized posts in our land and all this sort of stuff? So we're really getting a push from, it's a philosophical push rather than from our customers as well, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think our customers are asking for this as well, depending who your customer is. Like, it's obviously a big thing for North and South. Maybe some of our other importers around the world are just more interested in the volume and the price, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, that is what you're saying. Well, you've said a lot of things, but I mean, I think if we all want to be here, and it goes, I mean, completely across the board with agriculture. I mean, you need to be thinking about making sure that the agriculture uses less resources from the earth, and that you're farming smarter and farming in with respecting nature rather than actually fighting against nature, which is what most commercial agriculture has been for 100 years or something like that. Yeah, and it is an interesting point, actually, that you raised about what various markets expect. As I've noted, for instance, I mean, up until very recently, I mean, we have a huge conservation story as part of the DNA of our business. And for years, my American importer turned around and he said, nobody cares about what you're doing. We just want the best score and the best price. And I would tear my hair out. No, that can't be true. There must be at least 50 million people in the United States who care about what we're doing, and that 50 million is way enough customers for us. We just need to be, figuring out a way to find that person. But UK is sensitized to these issues, and anyway, it's good for all of our businesses to think about this and to actually pursue them properly.
I'm going to thanks guys. I was just going to ask you. This is kind of moving on from the serious existential stuff that we've been talking about. Let's take a little light-hearted edge here. So desert island winemaking. Okay, so what would be your dream region to make wine for a vintage? Okay, and what would you make on there? And let's just keep it nice and succinct, as it were. And I'll go to you, Bruce, on that one. Dream region, and what would you make there?
Oh, I guess it would have to be
wine.
I guess it would have to be Burgundy and down in the south amongst all the Chardonnay and the Pouligny Montrachets and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
That would have to be me, I guess, if I thought about what I would drink at home and what I would, for sure. That would be South Africa a close second.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. At least we're friendly here.
What about yourself, Jeremy? Dream region, and what would you make?
I read that question on the thing, and I was like, flip, now this is such a difficult question to answer. But I suppose, I was really enchanted when I went to the Loire a few years ago, and felt that that was just kind of scratching the surface. But I think it would, unfortunately, probably want to be in two different places, because I probably want to be in Chinon and work with a little bit of Cabernet Franc, because those wines are so intriguing, and then in Vouvray with some Chenin.
Going back to the Holy Grail, as it were.
Yeah, and gosh, it's such a charming and nice place as well. That's the thing, and for me, wine is all about the culture of the place, and coming to your region, Bruce, wouldn't be too shabby either, to be honest with you. I could probably squeeze a vintage in if you're harvesting in May too.
I reckon we could be matchmakers here, guys. I think
you'd have to teach me how to turn on all those big machines, but I think I could probably figure it out.
They're pretty easy, Jeremy. They're pretty easy. Just bigger versions, that's all.
That's right. Yeah. Right. Okay. So I'm going to ask you guys just some technical questions, just to kind of just some quick answers on technical questions here, just because I think it's interesting to know, really. So Bruce, I just want to get an idea for the key parameters you're looking for at harvest. So what they might be: potential alcohol, acidity, etc., that kind of thing. So.
I guess if I was talking about, I make a lot of different wines, but I guess if I was talking about Sauvignon Blanc as the bulk of it,
yep.
We we're looking for a certain amount of sugar, I guess, although that's sort of, we're allowed to chaptalize in New Zealand, so we can deal with slightly unripe grapes if needs must. And getting that, I guess I'm not a winemaker that likes doing a lot of additives. I hate having to deacidify wine. I don't like having to chaptalize it. I hate having to fine, and I'm sort of strong believer that every time you sort of fiddle around with it and you play with it, you sort of do a bit of damage, or more often than you do good sometimes. So I guess parameter-wise, we're looking for a reasonable level of ripeness. Ideally, I could tell you the perfect ripeness that I'm looking for is somewhere between about 21.5 and 22 bricks, basically, which would give me a sort of potential alcohol of, spot on would be 12.8 to 13.2 alcohol with a little bit of residual sugar, 3 or 4 grams of residual sugar in there, and probably lots of good acid. I've always regretted whenever I've thought, my wine's too acidic and I'm going to deacidify it a little bit, and I always think, I was just too scared. I should have just stuck with the acid, basically. Yeah. So that's sort
Fortune
of
favors the brave, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the I guess if there's a little bit of patience as well to sell the wine, it's having nice, really vibrant acidity is great. If they have to be pushed out the winery and onto the truck the next day, that can be a little bit of an issue. But
well, if you're in Sauvignon Blanc land, you can get away with it, really.
Yeah, right.
It kind of defines the wines.
Jeremy, how do you manage the impact of oxygen, the protection from it, or the deliberate use of it? Indeed, how do you manage?
James, I make so many different wines that they all have a different approach, and I don't make them the same every vintage either, because I try and actually make what I think is going to be the best wine that a specific vintage is going to give me. But I guess with white wines, I tend to do a mix. So I do some winemaking where I don't use as much CO2 with my wines at all. But I get press the crush and press and go straight into tanks, and then I'll gas the top of the tank. But I also tend to do a few little batches of wines where I purposely oxidize the white wine juice and but there's no rules in Painted Wolf land.
What would I say? I guess something like your Roussanne, for example. How would you manage that particular wine? In terms, because I noticed that's got some really interesting breadth of kind of aroma.
So that's whole bunch pressed, and it's the one that we've got that Bruce has got has been made very simply. I mean, that was just whole bunch pressed and settled and into barrel and fermented with its own yeast, and that was that. But for the 2020, which you'll be getting very soon, I changed the recipe up a little bit, and I sucked in quite a bit of solids into part of the ferment. The wine's got I think for me a lot also depends on what the bricks or the balling of the grapes are. Balling's higher, I can go a bit more solids in the wine. If the balling is very low, I like the juice to be very clean. And we work with a lot of unirrigated vineyards and a number of organic vineyards, so there's no pre-emergence allowed. So your ripening,
and you're all hand-picked, Jeremy,
and all hand-picked. Everything hand-picked. So
that's a big difference between us, isn't it? Like, I'm machine harvesting almost everything. Everything. I mean,
I have a range of wines called the Den, which are mainly actually wines that I buy in, and those are farmed by people that machine pick and those wines are made reductively, the white wines, and but the ones that I'm actually tinkering around with myself are and I mean that's the one thing that you really do have to get used to when you're farming organically, is that you're going to get uneven ripening. It's the reality, because you never get all your buds you never get bud burst on in the whole block at the same time, and it's and for practical reasons, it's often not possible to selectively or do 3 runs or 4 runs in a vineyard when you don't have your own picking crew either. So you have to make your best judge on what is the best balanced ripening in the block. So I think there are maybe some wine producing regions that are better. I don't know how you fare with your fruit set and bud burst and stuff with on vineyards that are farmed completely organically in your region. You might get cold enough in winter to be able to get appropriate dormancy and not have that as an issue.
No, I wouldn't say evenness was a problem, but no, it's generally all right. So I mean, I'd say the big difference here is Jeremy's sort of more in that sort of old world style of winemaking, and whereas for us with our sort of protective approach to Sauvignon Blanc and machine harvesting, the logistics of it, you need to be using the tools of the new world winemaker, which for us is temperature control. So picking our best blocks at night when it's cold, it'll be 5 degrees Celsius at night, sort of thing, when we're bringing fruit in. So it's pretty good temperature to be machine picking, and we're using a little bit of sulfur in the field and a little bit at the press tray as well. And varying that, like Jeremy's saying, changing that depending on the season as well. Like depending on the levels of I use some sort of oxidative approaches to things like Chardonnay and Riesling, Pinot Gris as well. Sees no sulfur in the field even when we're machine harvesting it. But if there's disease out there, then you need to. Well, for me anyway, I have to be starting to get involved and sort of putting my sort of philosophy to one side and going, okay, I've got disease. You really need to jump in and start using sulfur and protecting what you've got. Yeah,
I mean that's absolutely the case. I mean that's I mean I think that's winemakers who claim that they are not using sulfur or things. I mean they really are treading a dangerous thing. Because I mean we have botrytis. We have botrytis. I mean, I've had a couple of years now where I've had oidium in particularly in organic vineyards, and you just cannot make a wine with grapes that have had oidium unless you use sulfur. I mean, it's just it's already a dangerous space, and your acids are so high, and and with red wine the color doesn't fix nicely. So, I mean, I think. Having the ability to actually get into your vineyards and really look and really know what's going on, and then to think through what you have to do to actually make those grapes produce the best wine that's possible. I think that's a huge thing. How many viticulturists have you got in your team?
What, good ones or just ones in general?
That's it. I don't expect you can actually probably answer the first one.
Do you want me to rate? Shall I rate them as well?
Yes. Kind of like rate my viticulturists. There's a website waiting to be done.
Is he any good? Gertrude.
We have what do I have? I said sort of 3 vineyard managers that sort of all sort of trained and very very good at their job. So. Yeah,
I mean you've got such a great university, and trying to think what it's called now. Lincoln. Yeah, I was going to say Jackson. Lincoln. Yeah.
That's it.
Let's grab this moment.
Sorry, where you go?
It feels like we should try the wines now. Because we're kind of so let's keep the chat going and try the wines while we're carrying the chat on. And while we're opening it, while you're cracking open your wines or pouring your wines, we'll try. Would you start? If you can explain, if I get Jeremy to try the Tohu Sauvignon Blanc, and if you can say, Bruce, it's pretty obvious, but why you chose the wine and what story it tells about your winery and region. I think we've already kind of touched on a lot of this, but just kind of explain a little bit more about what you're doing there. Yeah. Keep it to a minute or so. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Tohu Sav that we sent over to Jeremy is very much our sort of flagship wine, I suppose. It would be, I'm sure it's our most awarded wine as far as medals and trophies and on that sort of fine wines of New Zealand list and stuff like that. So it really is our sort of, Sauvignon Blanc is the flagship for Marlborough, and that is our, the flagship for us as well. We also, we do a more generic blend of all the different sort of sub-regions under our Kono label, which is a larger volume, sort of a more entry-level, more classic Marlborough Sauvignon, whereas I think the Awatere Valley one, which I think is what Jeremy's got, is a much more sort of more sort of concentrated, less in your face aromatics, sort of a bit more sort of minerality and more that sort of green capsicum, and not quite so tropical, not that big tropical fruit bomb, which is more typical of Marlborough Sauvignons. and it's really just speaking to its place. Like the bulk of the grapes in that wine that you've got coming from our vineyard and somewhere behind me up in the mountains there. So very high vineyard, very cold, very sort of concentrated fruit. So crop levels are always. I mean, we've had a massive yielding year in Marlborough this year, and this vineyard is still sort of coming at sort of probably half of what most of my growers are growing. So you get really good sort of concentration and sort of balance.
What's the altitude and the exposure of the vineyard?
This is about 240 meters above sea level.
240, right? Okay.
240, yeah. So it'll be the one of, if not the highest in Marlborough. So most of Marlborough is sort of valley floor at sea level, basically, or within 20, 30 meters of sea level. And this is about 40 kilometers inland from the ocean as well. So it's really getting up into the sort of a tight little valley, as you can maybe see in the pictures. It's at the base of a 3,000 meter mountain, one of the tallest mountains in New Zealand. So it's a very cool, very, very hot, dry day. So very low disease pressure.
Yes.
So very low humidity. We have zero humidity really, and very dry.
Is it south facing?
The whole vineyard is sort of on old river flats, river terraces. So all of our, well, actually not all of them, but most people would sort of align their rows sort of on the north-south orientation or thereabouts. Yeah. So hardly anyone in Marlborough would be on slopes, Jeremy. We're all on basically valley floor.
On flat.
Valley floor or straight up some big snowy mountain, basically.
Well, I have to say it's one of the most outstanding Sauvignon Blancs I've ever tasted.
Oh, very good.
Absolutely fabulous.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, I love the aromatics. Actually, it's got something that you find in some Chenin from our region. It's got a lot of passion fruit in the that's some passion fruit pulp rather than skin sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's do the Roussanne, I guess.
The palate is just so extraordinary. It's completely mouth-filling. To me, it feels like a wine that's had some considerable lees contact, although it probably hasn't. It's just it's just fruit extract. It's just got a really it doesn't taste like lees contact, but it's just got this very massive, big mouth. That's absolutely delicious.
Oh, very good. I think it's just the sort of the concentration in it, I think, from our sort of low cropping vineyards and that sort of stuff. Yeah. The winemaking is very simple, Jeremy. I don't find that at all. We do no press cuts on it. So it's all everything hard pressed. It's all in there. It gets bentonite for fining, but I don't do any other fining whatsoever.
Right.
I like all those nights. We still cold settle doing, and I think that gives a lot of body to the wine as well. A lot of people here have moved away from cold settling for flotation. Flotation, which is very fast and separates your juice out very quickly. And
that's big winery stuff.
It is, yeah. Very good for the accountant, but that's about it. It doesn't make better wine.
So try the Roussanne then. So Bruce, and let's move on to let's get on to the discussion of the.
Yeah, it smells like the Loire, Jeremy. I know it's not where Roussanne is from, but what it reminds me of is those that sort of that floral and some of those sort of lanolin, those sort of wet wool sort of character coming through. Is it a straight Roussanne, but 100% Roussanne?
It actually has a little bit of Chenin at the back end of the wine just to tighten the acidity up. But I mean, it's picked at reasonably low levels of sugar for Roussanne. I mean, Roussanne is often picked very ripe, and at the I think it's got about 13.2% alcohol, that wine, and you tend to get more kind of floral blossom, English meadow blossoms. When you go riper, you get more kind of nectarine, peach, dried stone fruit, aromatics. And this vineyard is in a warm place. I mean, it's a northeastern facing vineyard planted on decomposed granite soil, so it's extremely sunny. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that I find that it has attracted me to the variety is that you can make this really supple and very pretty wine that has got quite a tactile mouthfeel in a warm place. And the normal, the Chardonnay and I mean, Sauvignon in warm place gives you, it gives you an attractive commercial wine, but not a fine wine. And I think Roussanne has the ability to do that, and it's also quite drought tolerant.
A really lovely sort of weight and texture to it, like that suppleness to it. I think it's pretty dry, but it sort of almost gives that impression of having a richness or a sort of a sweetness to it. I see some of that straw, that sort of cut straw character coming through, but maybe that's the age of it, is it? Is it just showing a bit of
2019 or 20? Yeah.
Is that that sort of develops as
it develops a little straw character. It actually bottle ages really, really well. I mean, recently I opened it 2012. It was absolutely lovely. You probably know Wine State magazine in Australia.
Yeah,
they did a big retrospective on South African wine 3 or 4 years ago, and this Roussanne was the top rated unusual wine from South Africa from Wine State, which was quite nice actually.
It goes back, Jeremy. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how you talk about the UK market and how we've kind of we accept these kind of interesting things that you're doing, these kind of like cool little kind of different varietals and different production methods and what have you. And actually, I think probably kind of going more micro on that. Actually, I think if you look at who we are as individuals within North South Wines, we're all very interested in interesting things. And you, Bruce, you mentioned about Albarino as well. And this for me, this product, the Roussanne, is something that we just love. We think is fantastic because it really does kind of, it keeps your kind of interest going in the wine industry, really just generally, because you're just saying, well, it's not all about that, although that is fantastic. It's not about this as well. Look at what can be made over here and what can be done with that over there. And I think that's the way that the wine should be going and does go. And it's not to kind of dilute the importance of something like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, because we love the Awatere Valley product you just tried there, Jeremy, as well.
There's everything to be loved about it. I mean, it's a brilliant wine.
It's absolutely exactly precise and lovely in its kind of flavor profile. But yeah, absolutely, we love interesting variations on a theme, and they're never going to take over the world. But what they do is they keep your interest levels nice and high, and it's over here and something new. You bit of news over here.
I'm really looking forward to tasting your Albarino, Bruce. It's a variety that I really like a lot. I mean, those Rias Baixas, those are
Rias Baixas.
Those are.
My mother's from Galicia. From Galicia, so I'm all about Albarino.
You know it, yeah.
So try the Jeremy. Try the Chardonnay. Try the is it the Whenua Chardonnay? We got the Whenua.
I'm not actually sure what we think. Was it Whenua our Chardonnay? Is it?
It's the Matua.
Oh, Whenua Matua. Is that the 20? What vintage is that one, Jeremy?
2018.
Oh, that was my decanter superstar one, I think, or whatever it was. One of those.
I saw you got a posh medal for it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Massive pay rise too, Jeremy.
Exactly that. Yeah.
So I'll tell you what really floated my boat last year. So the inexpensive Sauvignon Blanc that we bottle, I buy in. And the 2020 of my Lightning is the first Sauvignon Blanc I've ever bottled in my life that I made, and it got a gold medal at that Concours Mondial competition, the Sauvignon competition. I was absolutely gobsmacked.
Yeah, you've been hiding that. Exactly. It's kind of...
I do have a job for you.
So I had porridge for breakfast this morning. I'm pleased. I've got something to benchmark the wine against.
It's been a while since I've tried that one that you're having, Jeremy, but we were sort of pretty I would say we were, I can't exactly remember what we did when with that. It was something at Decanter, wasn't it? But was that last year? Oh, God, I don't know.
Was it International Wine Challenge or Decanter?
Oh, it was International Wine Challenge, I think. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
We were sort of surprised to see that wine do so well, because it was a really, and it's 18 is a very challenging vintage in Marlborough and in Nelson. So that wine's from Nelson. So it's from over the northwest coast. So this is from sort of company owned. In fact, it's ancestral land for our owners, which is the reason that we have a vineyard there, is that it used to be owned by our owners hundreds and hundreds of years ago before it was turned into a vineyard. So they're sort of very passionate and sort of very interested in what we do on there, and very happy when we win trophies and things like that. But that wine in its youth was so tight and sort of linear and sort of undrinkable in its first year or so in bottle, I reckon.
What I was going to just chip in was that if I was poured this wine, in a blind situation, I wouldn't be heading in the direction of New Zealand for the wine. It has a focus. I mean, I'm not saying that New Zealand's Chardonnay isn't focused, because there's beautiful Chardonnay in New Zealand, but this has got a kind of a sort of cool climate focus, and the back end of the wine is just slightly sinewy. I would be going somewhere in Burgundy with this wine. But I'm not really quite sure where. But I'm
really happy with how it's all come together, because there's not very much ripe fruit in that. I would have said out of 2018, it's a very disease challenged and cold sort of vintage. So from my memory of 2018, from 4 years ago, it was a bit shaky, but as I recall, I wouldn't have picked any of that fruit at sort of anywhere near optimum ripeness or anything like that. So I'm pretty chuffed with how it's with how it's come out and how it's sort of all knitted together. Yeah,
I imagine it'll actually bottle age extremely well, this wine too.
Yeah. I think it's just starting to get going, to be honest. Unfortunately, after the IWC or whatever, we've sold out of it all, but there you go.
Yeah.
It's got some at my house, Jeremy, when you come visit.
Cool. It seems as though the pH of the wine feels very low too.
I think it would be, I mean, it's full malolactic, so it would be probably starting out in that sort of 3.2s and ending up in 3.5s, that sort of thing, I would say. Yeah. She's pretty tight, all right, that's for sure. Yeah. There would have been a lot of malic acid. That is for sure.
Yeah. I can imagine. We tried that recently as well. Very, very delicious.
Yeah, actually, New Zealand Riesling I've really enjoyed when I've tasted it. I mean, the wines are so precise and fine and compact.
Yeah, I agree. You just got to get someone to buy them. That's all.
Yeah, well, that's the story.
It's a bit like Roussanne, really. Doesn't matter how well you do it. You're still pushing a stone uphill.
Yeah. You're not wrong.
So cool, excellent. So we've got the Guillermo Pinotage as well, just to finish off on the trying.
Yeah. Where does that name Guillermo come from, Jeremy?
Yeah, so the vineyard belongs to an Argentinian guy called Guillermo Hughes, and I actually met him the very first week that I returned to South Africa in the end of 1996. When was it? Yeah, 1996, he grows these grapes organically, and also he's actually certified organic and follows biodynamic principles as well. The vineyard is unirrigated, planted on a decomposed shale, red-colored decomposed shale soil. And winemaking, pretty straightforward, simple, open fermenters, natural yeast, hand punched. The one thing with Pinotage, though, it needs an acid adjustment. The pH of the grapes are high and the acid is low. So when it comes in, I normally give it a judicious acid adjustment to try and actually bring the pH down more than anything else. Yeah, and then it's just fermented, pressed straight into barrel, malolactic in barrel. Simple winemaking.
How much new oak would be in that, Jeremy? It's pretty attractive oak that's coming through there, real that sort of cocoa-y, sort of chocolatey.
I think it's about 40%. It varies from year to year, depending on how much money I've got. To be honest with you.
How well the previous one sold us.
Yeah. So, it's mixed oak of mixed, heritage or whatever. So there's I buy French barrels, American barrels, Hungarian barrels.
I can see a little bit of American oak in there, that sort of coconutty, sort of toasty.
So I buy the most vulgar American oak barrels that you can get, which are Will Cooperage.
Oh,
and use maybe 10% of those barrels.
God, it's delicious, actually. It's a long time since I've had a Pinotage, to be honest. I guess there's probably not a lot of Pinotage being imported into New Zealand.
There's some grown in New Zealand,
There's some in Gisborne, I think, isn't there?
Yeah, well, Sherwood. He's up Dane. He has some, or he had some.
It's just down the road from me, 4 hours drive from me. Okay.
Sort of down the road-ish, But New Zealand was the first country outside of South Africa, the first proper wine-producing country to produce Pinotage. And it was planted in the 1960s. And then, for obvious reasons, I don't think they could sell it, and maybe it was a bit cool where it was being produced. It was one of the big wine producers, and I'm trying to think who it was. Gießen?
Yeah. Gießen could have been there from down Canterbury originally. Yeah, maybe.
Gießen, I think they were the original ones who, for some bizarre reason, decided they'd like to have a crack with Pinotage. I think maybe they were persuaded that it was good disease. It had good disease resistance or something.
Yeah. What was that vintage like, Jeremy? It seems very ripe, but without being in the same as the Roussanne. Like not really. It doesn't show a lot of alcohol, which I've seen before in Pinotages.
This is 2019, I think, the one that you've got, isn't it? Yeah, it's great vintage. Very, really, really good. It was the first. We had 16, 17, 18 were drought years, and 19 was the year that the drought broke. But the soil wasn't sufficiently charged with water to give us a big crop. It takes a little bit of time for your soil to recover after droughts. But what we did get is we got great leaves. And unfortunately, this is a dryland farming, and where these grapes are grown, it's about 450 to 480 mils a year. If you've had a protracted drought, your leaf covering the vines becomes very problematic. Actually, the drought was really devastating to these vineyards because there's some eutypa in the vineyards, and the drought just brought it on.
The stress.
The stress. Normally, that dead arm would take years and years and years to sort of chew its way back through the cordons, but after 3 years of getting 150, 200 mils of rain, so we lost so many cordons on these vines.
Wow, that is drought, isn't it? Far out.
Yeah.
I think I had 150 mils of rain in one day at the end of
I was going to say
in February.
Yes. Well, this last year we've had so much rain. It's been ridiculous. It's sort of gone from one extreme to the other, and summer rain, which has made it all quite complicated. But anyway, this is I guess this is one of the things about growing grapes, making wine.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. It's really, really delicious, Jeremy. It almost reminds me of because I'm not very experienced with Pinotage. It sort of puts me into that sort of Rioja sort of what it sort of reminds me of a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. It's got a little bit of Mourvedre and a little bit of Shiraz blended in it. We're allowed to blend 15%. I can't remember what the percentage of other varieties is. but this style is not typical here. I mean, I think the vineyard drives the style, undoubtedly, but I think some of my colleagues, their winemaking is super ambitious, and they do lots and lots of punch downs and lots of pump overs. It can be 8 pump overs a day. Get a really super extracted grape, and go for. I mean, the alcohol is not modest there, but purposely go for a very, very big wine. And I'm not so crazy about that style. It's a bit tiring, I think.
And if that alcohol is true on the label, that handles it really well, doesn't it? 3.5. I would never guess that as up there. Yeah,
small berries. So the dry extract is high.
We have a lot of independent customers in the UK who swear by this wine. Who really,
I bet
you just see this as kind of this is what Pinotage should be like. This is what it and it's kind of it's price wise from a retail perspective. It's fantastically made Pinotage that really sings.
Thank you.
Yeah, I bet, because I think they've been sort of tarnished a bit over here anyway with those sort of gamier, sort of funkier sort of versions.
Now there was a lot of crap wine. Not to put too fine a point to it.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. Thank you for saying that. That's exactly it. Best to come with horses.
But that was then, and I mean, so many things have changed, and most wineries have got winemakers who've been to universities that are academically in the same places as Roseworthy or Lincoln or. And they know all the modern winemaking techniques, and the viticulture is better, and I mean every it's all different. I mean one thing that really actually is a bit strange is that if you look at Richard Smart's Sunlight into Vines book, and you look at the credits on the back of it, quite a few of the papers that he used for part of his research were actually papers that were written by academics at the University of Stellenbosch. So they had a great academic program going, but winemakers who didn't follow any of the stuff that was being studied or being developed at the university about trellising and about leaf thinning and all the various things that Richard Smart became so famous for. A lot of the work was actually being pioneered here, but so many of the winemakers were, well, I'm not going to do that fancy stuff. This is how we do it. This is the South African way.
Yeah. You have to, Jeremy, do you have to sort of open up your canopy talking about Richard Smart, do you have to employ that, or are you more sprawling like the Australian style to try and keep that sun off your grapes, or what is it?
It's site dependent, actually, and I would say also vintage dependent. But I would say most of the vines that we work with, we like to keep some dappled shade on the grapes, because in February it's not unusual to have days that get to about 40 degrees. With wind, and if you're not careful, you get sunburn really quickly. But I mean, it's also I think if you are leaf thinning, just to do morning sun side. So so you're exposing your canopy to light, but on the cooler sun.
Sure.
So
similar approach here. Yeah.
Yes.
I think we were all probably doing more and more shading as we had possibly those warmer, droutier type years like you were talking about as well. And then we had the dreaded sort of powdery mildew starting to come through into lots of vineyards, and now everyone's a lot more sort of tighter and more fruit exposed and more exposed for sprays and all that sort of thing as well.
The guys that are growing Sauvignon for me, who are doing it organically, are spraying with potassium bicarbonate.
But
it has to be done as a contact spray. So you can only really do it in a small vineyard. I mean, and I know your labor is super expensive. I actually had an American lady come and work for me during harvest from our wholesaler in Colorado, and she'd worked at Kim Crawford's winery, but for somebody else's project. I can't remember who the name of the producer. And I was absolutely staggered at the salary that she was paid as a non-qualified harvest help. I mean, could it have been $30 an hour? Maybe. I mean, I can't remember.
Yeah.
It was a lot.
It could, that's sort of what I'm paying sort of supervisors this year, unfortunately. Yeah.
Maybe I'm exaggerating. Because it was, I asked her how much she'd earned on a letter because I was trying to pin down how much I should pay her, because I mean cellar workers in South Africa are not paid very much at all. So
exchange rate wrong, Jeremy. That's what she did.
Exchange rate wrong, and just the economy. You know, it's just a different economy. So
right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring this to a close with a very quick fire couple of questions. Literally, it's just this or this, simple quick fire round, and then we'll bring this lovely little session to a close, guys. Thank you very much. So first, I'm going to ask you both. I'll go to Bruce, Bordeaux or Burgundy? I think I know what the answer is.
Yeah, Burgundy, I suppose.
What about you, Jeremy?
Burgundy.
Okay. It's a common theme, isn't it?
I quite like Bordeaux, though, I must say.
Back to you, Bruce. Aperitif or digestif?
Ooh, God, aperitif, I reckon. I'm probably more aperitif, man.
Okay, Jeremy?
Definitely aperitif. By the time the digestif gets along, I'm normally tired from too many glasses of wine.
And back to Bruce. Petrol or pyrazine?
Petrol or pyrazine? Oh, I thought it was going to be a car question then, but can't afford petrol anymore. Oh, pyrazines, I think, aren't they? Definitely pyrazines. Yeah.
Jeremy?
I'm probably on the petrol end of the spectrum, but that's a difficult one really to answer because I mean there are great wines and really enjoyable wines that cover both spectrums.
I think there's something about, for me, I'm petrol. There's something more about the petrol side, which just kind of intrigues me and just kind of.
Well, if it's Pinotage, it's about diesel, isn't it?
Yeah. Right. So Bruce, Blanc de Blanc or Blanc de Noir?
Oh, Blanc de Blanc. I make a Blanc de Blanc, so I'm always quite fond of Blanc de Blancs.
And it's a good one as well. I'll give you that. Jeremy, Blanc de Blanc.
I'm afraid I'm with Bruce on this as well. Yeah. I just like the fineness and the flintiness rather than that more kind of luscious character in sparkling wine. Mm-hmm.
Bruce, sherry or port?
Sherry or port? Oh, I'm not a fan of either. I'd probably be sherry if I had to. Okay. I'm not a big fan of either, to be fair.
Okay.
I'm in the same space. I should probably say port just to be different.
Yeah, fair enough. And then what about Cab Sav or Cab Franc? I know what your answer is, Jeremy, but Cab Sav, Cab Franc.
Oh, I'll be Cab Sav for sure. I love cabs. I love good Cab Sav, that's for sure.
I'm up there with Cabernet Franc. I like that sinewy character.
And lastly, from a style point of view, Bruce, reductive or oxidative?
And the wine or the winemaking?
No, the wine.
I don't know. I quite like reductive wines, I suppose. Yeah. Okay. I'll be reductive.
And then what about you, Jeremy?
I'm going to sit on the fence with this one because it's really wine dependent.
Yeah.
I mean, Mm-hmm.
No, fair enough.
I wasn't aware that was an option.
Well, there we go. We've explored this new territory. It's a brave new world.
Yeah, that's it. That's the chicken option.
Yeah.
I've told you how beautiful your reductive Sauvignon Blanc is. I can't now take a pitch for oxidative wine. I mean, flip.
Exactly. That's it.
You make me disingenuous.
Ever the diplomat, Jeremy. Right, okay, let's bring this to a close. Just say thank you very much, guys, for your time. We have run over time, but we had so much to talk about, and I'll let the editors get to work and just cut that back. But it's been really good. And if you, I'm sure you guys will probably I'm sure send each other an email or something. I'll stay in touch, but it's nice to kind of introduce as well from that perspective. I think it's really an imperative thing is to kind of make sure you've got those connections around the world from winemaking, so you can kind of see what other people are doing and how they're progressing their own endeavors from a winemaking perspective. But
definitely. Bruce, thanks very much for organising this, James, and lovely to meet you, Jeremy. Your wines are really spectacular. Actually, we don't see a lot of South African wines, so they've definitely sort of exceeded my expectations. Yeah,
well, thank you. At least I've got something decent to drink this evening.
Yeah.
Bruce, where's your home?
Where do I live?
Yes.
So I live about sort of 20 minutes from the winery. I've come into the winery tonight because I've got noisy kids at home and all that sort of stuff. So I live in the Arbitrary Valley, so I've got a little 10-acre block up in the sort of very close to that vineyard, actually. So sort of up in the mountains, and sort of about 20-minute drive to work. Sometimes I see a car on the way to work, not usually.
What's the nearest big town?
Oh, so I go through a little town called, Blenheim is the main town, really.
Okay.
Yeah, my nearest town's Seddon, but Seddon doesn't have a pub. It's got a cafe, no petrol station or anything like that. So yeah, it's all pretty small stuff, really.
Town without a pub, that's a bit shocking.
Yeah. It's got a pub, but it got flattened by an earthquake about 7 years ago.
Yeah, you had that terrible earthquake flip.
Yeah.
Did you have any damage in the winery from that?
Yep. I lost about 80,000 litres of my best wine. I had some wine which I wouldn't have minded losing, but I didn't lose that one. I lost about 80,000 litres of that Sauvignon that you're tasting this morning, actually, and about $1.5 million in damage to the winery.
Right.
So that's where it's nice working for the winery and not owning the winery.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
I was in California when that Loma Prieta earthquake was the one that in the San Francisco Bay Area. And actually, the winery that I wasn't working in the winery there, but that winery was built on an old railway repair yard, and it had an enormously thick block that the building was built on, because they used to park dozens of trains in there at one stage, and that place actually fared quite well. Sort of just kind of floated backwards and forwards, and whilst the earth was shaking, nothing was destroyed. I mean, some barrels fell off cradles and stuff like that, but the actual, it was like a big huge ship floating on top of the earth. But some of the wineries, especially up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, which is where the epicenter was, they just lost. I mean, they lost so much stuff.
It really depends a lot on your sort of aspect of your soil and all that sort of stuff. That winery just down the road from us, 10 k's from us, which got flattened, and we had damage to repair, but we didn't lose any tanks. And if you'd been working in the winery at the time on catwalks, like nothing was dangerous. Like you would have survived being here. It was, our big quake here was midnight on a Sunday, so there was no one here, obviously, but scary stuff, because they always can happen, any second, basically.
Yes. I mean, it's just part of the deal. I mean, if you're in that sort of geological area,
quite exciting. Nice to know that we're not in control of everything in the world sometimes, I reckon. I had some questions for you, Jeremy. My kids wanted me to ask you. They wanted to know, they had a couple of questions. Do the baboons steal your grapes?
They do steal grapes. They don't steal any of the grapes that I'm working with specifically. But in certain places they're an issue. I mean, the unfortunate thing is that in so many instances, vineyards are planted in places that often in a riverine area where baboons would have foraged, so there was much more for them to eat. And now they're driven onto the mountain and they need to eat too. Unfortunately, it's for people who have this issue that often doesn't end up being very happy for the baboons.
No,
not something that I have.
I won't tell my kids that part of the story.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But I mean, you've got wild boar in New Zealand, don't you?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. They don't
very
really do any
destructive.
damage.
Oh, really?
Deer do a little bit of damage to us. They come up out of the rivers and eat the sort of fresh shoots on the outside, but nothing like that. Now, I think the other question was, have you touched an elephant? I'm quite sure why they wanted to know that, but
I have, but I don't actually
touched an elephant, but they just wanted to know if you'd touched an elephant.
I have, but it's not something that I actually encourage as a
They're quite prickly, I think, from memory.
Yeah, they're a wee bit prickly, but the elephants that are able to be touched have been basically forced into compliance, and it's really anything to do with touching and petting wildlife never has a happy backstory. It's and this the lion petting is.
I'll make up a different answer on your behalf for them.
No, indeed. But it's I'm sorry, I'm giving all the wrong answers. but I have to say, actually, touching an elephant is really a most extraordinary feeling. And I mean, years ago, my wife and I used to work in the safari industry in Botswana, and I've had many extremely intimate encounters with wild elephants that are just incredibly special. I mean, sleeping on the top of my Land Rover and waking up to find a trunk right down on my face, smelling me. And I mean, they smell like sort of cows on steroids. I mean, they have a sort of bovine cow poop smell about them, but it's just so much more intense. And so, you can. I mean, I do some cycling in a hub with funding a bush cycle ride, and we cycle through areas where there are wild elephants, and you can smell them way before you get to them. Actually, that's one of the handy things about being a winemaker as well. I can always smell these creatures long before we know that they're there. Like
my kids will like the answer that elephants smell like cow poo. They'll love that part.
Yeah. They're like, that's like bionic cow poo.
On that wonderful note,
sorry about that, James.
I actually have to go swimming. Believe it or not, it's a bank holiday, and I've got to get out.
Oh, how lovely! I'm going to go and have a cycle ride. And how old are your kids, Bruce?
5 and 8.
Oh, that's anyway. That's being a mature man is nice to have small kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Much easier.
I'm 52, so I came a bit late to having kids. So apart from being a bit tired all the time, it's pretty good.
Me too, Bruce. I'm 9 and 6, so I'm on the same wavelength. So don't worry.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But I have to. I mean, this is my last little thing, but I think that having kids when you're older is much better. You're not having that anxiety that comes with being a young guy and always wanting to be in the pub with your mates instead of looking after the kids, and all the stuff that and the other anxieties that come with being. Sorry,
is that being a young guy, Jeremy?
What's that?
Wanting to be in the pub with your mates all day.
I think you mean every day.
That carries on, Jeremy. I'm pretty sure.
Well, we wish. All right, lovely. Right. Thank you so much.
Nice one, chaps. Take care. All the best, eh?
Thanks, guys.
Yes.
See you later.
It's a pleasure. Take care.